Cool. Excellent, thank you. And thank you all for being here. I'm very honored to actually kick off DLD this year. I went through who was speaking after me, and it's everything from the future of neuroscience to using brain waves to play ping pong, the future of search, future of travel, generative AI, which is on everyone's mind, and then I have to kick things off. So there's a lot of pressure here, but I think it sort of says, and it's a testament to what Steffi and the team have built here with DLD. You know, a lot of events and a lot of conferences are very myopic in that they go extremely deep in their areas, and I love to go deep. But what I like about DLD is that it brings together people from different walks of life who have different focuses, and you can spend a few days really going deep into different areas and learning about how these things connect. And I think connecting the dots has never been more important. So for my part, I want to give you a little bit of a taste of what I think is going to be some of the challenges that are facing publishing in the year ahead. But I think it's setting up for actually a change in how this industry operates. And I think there's a lot of doom and gloom out there overall in the world, but it doesn't have to be, because I think we're in a period of reset expectations, and I think that that is proper. Because I know I wasn't here at the DLD right before Corona virus really took off. I remember I was in Japan when the Diamond Princess was off the coast there. And I don't think any of us really understood just how long this was going to last. And I know for myself, I always thought that there was going to be an end, and it turns out there wasn't an end. There wasn't like some sort of parade or anything like this. I remember seeing that video of the Wuhan hospital when all the nurses were taking off their masks thinking, that's what it's going to happen. That was back in like April 2020, and of course it didn't happen. The pandemic kept going on, and I don't think we'll fully understand the full impacts of this period for a long time to come. And so I want to put that in the what is facing publishing in that kind of context over the next 15 minutes. Because I think what happened with the pandemic is it led to a lot of bubbles, a lot of economic bubbles that existed that we're still dealing with right now. And I know when the pandemic first happened, you know, I've been in publishing for about 20 years, and I was the president of a publishing company called Digiday Media, and we made like 75% of our revenue through in-person events like this, because they're so powerful to bring people together in communities. And it's really impossible to do online, right? And so that when the pandemic happened, it was a real existential crisis for us as a company. I thought we were gonna go out of business. And I remember talking to like our CEO, and he was like, well, we're on our own. The government won't do anything. But governments did act, and they put a lot of money into the economy in the US and around the world. And that combined with a lot of the quantitative easing and the low interest rate policies that were enacted after the financial crisis led to a lot of money chasing too few opportunities. And I think that we are just dealing with all of these mini bubbles. First one was the digitization leapfrog. And there was this idea that we were going to leap ahead to the future. And this led to some craziness. Just think on the event side how Hopin at one point was being valued at $7.5 billion. They had only existed for a couple of years. They'd only started in 2019. The idea was events like this would go away and we were all just going to do it online. That never happened, right? And like I think a lot of times while there was a lot of leapfrogging and digitization, it didn't happen to the degree that we thought it was going to happen. And the other one was that the consumer was forever changed. And, you know, look, our habits absolutely changed during the pandemic. That is without a doubt. But it wasn't as if Peloton was going to kill the gym. When I go by gyms in New York, they're still full again. The movie theaters are struggling, but the idea that we were just going to get delivery food instead of going to restaurants, that wasn't true. Delivery food has never really tasted good except for pizza. And so restaurants are full again. And a lot of these like consumer behaviors that did change, people saw those signals and assumed that they were gonna last forever. And look what is happening in Silicon Valley now. They overhired so much and they were all reading the same signals. I mean, these are very bright and capable people. I know it's easy to say, oh, they didn't know what they were doing. Of course they knew what they were doing, but these were some of the mistakes that got made during this unprecedented period. And the other one is like we thought that a lot of these crises were going to be transitory. You know, at the time, I remember Adam Tooze, the the economist at Columbia University, he called it a time of polycrises. I think he took it from someone at the EU. But polycrises were the idea we had these overlapping crises, economic. We had an economic crisis. We obviously had a health crisis. We had a social crisis then with the murder of George Floyd. And we thought that these crises would be temporary, but it turns out that we're in a state of now like permacrisis, and that we're just dealing with constant uncertainty. And that dealing with that constant uncertainty, I think it's easy to focus on just the immediate, when in fact, in the long term, a lot of things are changing for the better. And I think the other thing that we saw with the era of loose capital is that growth was prioritized over profits and the long term, because the cost of capital is basically zero. You're going to put a lot of money is going to go into some good ideas and some not very good ideas. And a lot of those were premised on growth at all costs. And the publishing industry fell into that. They saw growing audiences, they saw growing overall subscriber numbers, and they thought that that was going to continue forever. And this is all part of the reset that I think is happening in the year ahead. And I don't think it has to be negative, because I think a lot of excesses end up needing to be flushed out of systems for them to truly grow in a sustainable manner. And so some of the media bubbles that existed on that were like the streaming bubble. Okay, during the pandemic, when everyone was stuck at home, we were all glued to our TVs because we couldn't go out anymore. And so that accelerated the shift to streaming and the idea that everyone's going to have a direct to consumer business. And I think in the long run, more companies are going to need to develop direct relationships with their customers, and particularly in media. But the problem is, in media, there's the old saying is there's two ways to make money: unbundling and then bundling. And like this period of unbundling was impossible to keep up with. There cannot be a million different streaming channels that people subscribe to. And the same ways there's a subscription bubble. For too long, publishers were relying on advertising revenue as the sole or overwhelming majority of their businesses. And so subscriptions became a way to de-risk from advertising. Advertising is very easy to turn on and off, as publishers are finding out now in an economic pullback. But the problem is there cannot be so many subscription services. I think Substack, where I publish, is a tremendous platform. But the idea that people are going to pay for 10 or 15 different individual publications is hard to really wrap your head around. And really the same thing happened with a lot of news publishers. While publications in the US, there's simply too many of them out there. And the other one is the creator bubble. And this one I sort of go back and forth on a little bit, because I do think that there is a major shift going on right now from institutions to individuals. People simply trust individuals far more than faceless institutions. And there are tremendous examples of creator success stories. There's someone like Mr. Beast, who started as a YouTube channel devoted to doing stunts, has now built a $1.5 billion media empire on the back of really his personality and the tie that he has with his audience, which is completely different, I think, than the kind of tie that people have with regular media brands. But not everyone can be a creator. There's a power law that happens, and there's breakout successes, but there's not a middle class that has really developed. And then there was an advertising bubble. Any time of frothy economic activity, it is going to filter down. We saw this with the crypto bubble, because a lot of that money then ended up going down to publishers. In the US, sports gambling took off during the pandemic because it was legalized again, led to an advertising bubble. And now, of course, CFOs are cutting off advertising, and that is going to lead to a lot of pain in the year ahead for publishers. And then finally, the commerce bubble. Publishers have realized during the pandemic that they could not just have advertising and subscriptions, but could sell their own products, right? And a lot of these commerce operations of publishers are basically search operations. So it's you publish gift guides, and you take a cut off of when people click on the link and then go on to buy a product. Problem was, publishers saw the wrong signals from the pandemic when people were shopping online at levels they never had. Supposedly, I remember Shopify saying that e-commerce adoption had fast forwarded by 20 years. Well, that was the wrong bet because it fell back to like normal growth patterns. And so publishers are going to have to deal with the fact that they thought their commerce businesses were going to be far larger than they truly are going to be. But I think this can obscure what some of these big shifts that are going to happen and that will continue to happen through the year. And the one that I mentioned earlier is just the rise of the individual. I mean, what Substack has done with enabling individuals to be media businesses of their own, basically by just, in a day, you can just set up a media business. As long as you have something to say, and as long as you have like an audience that wants to pay for it, it's a tremendous thing. And I think we're going to continue to see individuals leave established brands and set off on their own. Because I said, people trust other people far more than they do regular institutional brands. And if you look at the most vibrant areas of publishing right now, I don't think it's a coincidence that it's like areas like newsletters and podcasts, because those are built around individual connections. The inbox is where you get emails from other people. And so I think the best newsletters read like, the same kind of mail you would get from a friend. Same thing with a podcast. I've done podcasts for many years now, and the human voice has like a connection to people that sets you apart. And I think when we talk about this coming era of AI, that's going to be incredibly important. Because AI is going to be talked about nonstop, I know, not just at this conference, but throughout this year. Because I don't know about you, but when you first used ChatGPT, it's one of the few technology holy shit moments that you've probably had in the last like 10 years. I think the iPhone was one of them. Because you start to imagine like a future that you thought was going to exist in science fiction. And if ChatGPT is pretty good now, this is like basically when Michael Douglas was holding up that massive cell phone on the beach in Wall Street. This is only going to get more sophisticated. So I think as someone who creates content for a living, it's a little scary. I was fine with automation and robots taking over when it was more manual work, but when it came to writing, I started to get a little sensitive about it. And the reality is, I think in an era of AI, what you're going to see with publishing is it's going to become more human, and it's going to become more based around community, because these are things that robots can't do, that digitization can't do. There's a reason that we're all here in person and not online. And that's because you can't recreate, in my view, you can't recreate DLD like in a metaverse. It's just not going to be the same. And I think publishers have to think about that. And the other one is the end of scale. For years, publishers tried to take their cues from Silicon Valley and tried to amass the biggest numbers of audience they could, and tried to play a game of like, we're going to be able to collect as much data as possible and use that for ad targeting. And it didn't work at all. BuzzFeed was, during the pandemic, had what at the time was a disappointing IPO valued at only $1.5 billion. Now it's down to $150 million valuation. It's about to become a penny stock in the US on the stock exchange. And it's hard to see it surviving as an independent company at the end of 2023. Now, this is one of the most iconic, in quotes, digital media brands. So I think that says that era is pretty much over. And I think the future of publishing can be bright, but it's going to be much smaller and much more focused and specialized than it's been before. I don't think you're going to see a lot of people raising money to have general news publications in the years ahead. And the other thing is, I think we're entering the permission era. For too long, publishing and media has relied on doing things in the background and developed adversarial models with their audience. The audience didn't come first, the audience often came last. And that's just not going to cut it, I think, in the years ahead. Publishing has to have a direct connection to the audience, but they need to put the audience first. That means asking for permission when it comes to collecting data. The fact that governments and even Apple had to enforce standards in this actually is a testament to how the entire industry really didn't do the job it should have done. And finally, before the band plays me out, because I only have 25 seconds left, I think the human premium is going to be more important because, you know, in an age of synthetic content, one estimate I saw said that 95% of digital content is going to be synthetic in the next few years. I think it is going to raise the value of human connection. And so for publishing to thrive, and I think really all industries to thrive in this, it's imperative to develop that one-to-one connection because it's something that right now, as far as I can tell, robots cannot do better than humans. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.